see everyone back on, and we'll pick up with questions from Board Member Walsh. I did just want to give a quick time check. It was expected that Ms. Green's testimony might take the most time, but I think we're a little behind where I would like to be at this point in the hearing. So if we could just, be as concise as possible, that'd be great. So Board Member Walsh, go ahead.
Thank you, and hello, Ms. Green. Thank you for being here again with us.
Well,
your filing says that the medical trend is being driven by price, utilization, and acuity, but the explanations offered vary. Sometimes it's worsening health, sometimes it's increased access. Have you broken down the utilization component specifically to examine the differences? And how can you tell whether the increase is driven more by patient need or system behavior?
we do break down the utilization trend and look at the number of services per visit, the number of visits, and all of that. And we do know that they're all going up. The reality is that we don't really know what's driving that. Short of pulling medical records or doing some sort of thorough survey, we don't know for sure if it's acuity or just more services being administered. We just see what's been processed.
Have you assessed whether technologies, software used by providers might be contributing to more intensive coding or shifting in the acuity mix that would drive the trend?
That has been an area of research and investigation. We have a number of people that have done some analysis to try and figure out if there's patterns that would tell us that there's something systematic going on. To my knowledge, there hasn't been a lot uncovered in that, as I said, without knowing for sure with medical records, et cetera. We don't know, billing is could be correct. But there have been a couple of situations, and our teams are following up on them where we can see for particular services, the pattern of the use of certain codes has shifted, and we follow up on those to see if we can find out if there's something about the billing practices or the coding practices that we can follow up with providers on. But it's not something that is evident across the board by any means.
I'm glad to hear of your efforts. It's difficult as regulators or the public as well to understand between the structural need for healthcare and opportunistic behavior. And I think trying to help us sort that out would be good. Is there something that you believe the system could be doing to make it easier for you to do that type of analysis?
There are a number of opportunities that we've pursued around making it more efficient for us to access medical records, for example. That's just one example that comes to mind, so that we save the provider from having to pull them. We save our team from having to find them and get access to them. So we've been able to arrange to have direct access to some of the providers' electronic health records in a very secure way, such that we can avoid the labor-intensive process of looking at medical records. So that's just one example of things that the more we can encourage the healthcare system to find seamless ways for everyone to access the information that they need, I think that's a helpful thing. Yeah, that's the only thing that comes to mind immediately. I'm sure just like if as you indicate, it's helpful for the board to understand what we're seeing in the cases of some of these practices. If we run across opportunities where we think the board could help us, with this work, we'll be certain to bring it to your attention.
Thank you. That'd be great. You mentioned that you have access with some providers. Are those, can you say more about that? Is this a small handful? Is it with one organization? Is it multiple organizations? Can you help me understand the scope, please?
Yeah, the specific counts and details I don't have with me. My sense is that we've been making a lot of progress in the last year or two getting secure access to that. There are a few outstanding systems, and I don't know which providers those are. I do know that, for instance, just anecdotally, there's one provider we're working with where they've given us access, but there's something about us on our firewall side that we have to address too. So it's sort of a joint effort to work through the remaining opportunities there. But that is something that has really helped in the last couple of years.
Could you, not right now, of course, but just in response, give us some more detail about the number of providers, where they work, and what you're seeing?
Yeah, in terms of the electronic health records, yes, sure, can do that.
That'd be great. Thank you. During Chair Foster's questioning, you described how difficult it is to negotiate with providers in Vermont. And he was asking questions about the budget neutrality approach that's evolved over time. And then during Member Holmes's questioning, she asked about numerous programs with unclear ROIs. Can you help me understand the relationship, if there is any, between the programs that Member Holmes was questioning and the budget neutrality approach?
Yeah, I guess I would just say that as the programs are operationalized, there's engagement with providers on what we're doing, and if it affects something that the providers doing with our members, we would be, communicating and working with the providers on that side. In terms of the budget neutrality issue, I do think that some of the lack of uptake, if you will, on some of the value-based programs and perhaps some of the other programs are indirectly related, I'll say, to kind of a provider preference. But they're really separate. But I guess I wouldn't say that they're not related in any way, because of course all of these programs are trying to make sure that our members get the right care at the right time at the right price. And so whether it's the discussion with a provider on budget neutrality versus implementing a program, it's all in the same mix, and might play into that. But I don't think that there's a causality or a direct correlation.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It was while listening to their questions, I just started to wonder if a Blue Cross Blue Shield program was leading to substantial savings, wouldn't that be perceived as a loss to the provider? And wouldn't they then, with this budget neutrality approach, try to make it up somewhere else, so that ultimately it'd be difficult to see benefit from the programs, but there's a lot of administrative costs to run them.
Yeah, and just in the there is a really good example of the dynamic that you described, but I don't think it necessarily triggers a budget neutrality conversation per se, but the site of care rollout is a good example of, we believe that if a member would prefer to have an in-home infusion, that's probably good for the member. And until the Act 55 was passed, we saw significant financial savings with the at-home care. And we did have to have, pretty frank conversations with some of the providers about how this would take members out of their facilities and change how that care is being delivered. And there's a variety of responses, but again, I don't know for sure if that sort of would then directly lead to a revenue neutral conversation. But certainly you do get the impression that the hospitals have a budget and they are trying to get the revenue from some of these services. And if we're advocating for a change, that is always an active conversation with providers. We often lead from the member perspective, and that is helpful to say, we're not requiring all of our members to do that, but if they prefer, and I think sometimes the providers acknowledge that, or I shouldn't say sometimes, but they acknowledge the value of the patient having the service provided in a place that they prefer. So that's a little bit different dynamic than just the negotiation of a revenue neutral conversation. So that's what I mean by it's sort of indirect and can connect back and forth, but it's we lead the programs more from what's right for the member and how it'll be cost effective.
Okay. Thank you for that. I've also been listening and listening to the length that carriers go through and our consultants go through to examine the actuarial soundness of the filings. And I'm wondering, do you believe that this filing from Blue Cross Blue Shield is doing what you can to fight for affordability for Vermonters? Or is it more of a technical explanation of why costs are rising so much for the company?
Well, I think the purpose of the actuarial analysis is to determine if the estimates that we're making for 2026 premiums will cover the claims and the costs to administer in a CTR. So from that sense, it's it's the most affordable. I think we've said in the past, the most affordable possible, taking into account the need to have fully funded premiums. So that really, as I said earlier this morning, that that's really a different type of metric than just the reality of how high the healthcare costs are in Vermont. So I think if that's what you're getting at, I think the call to action across all stakeholders is really we have to solve the healthcare cost escalation problem in order to solve the premium escalation problem.
I see. Thank you for that. It sounds to me as though, well, what I just heard was that the filing that is before us is the best possible filing with considering affordability and actuarial soundness and quality and access. Would it be reassuring to Vermonters if they also saw a model run with a lower rate request and how that led to lower reserves or a larger threat to solvency? We only see one model, and we're told that model is safe, it's enough. But we don't have any sense of is it more than enough?
I guess I would first just point out that Martine Lemieux, who is our chief actuary, can speak to the actuarial soundness of what we've put forward. But I guess at a high level, what I would say is that for where Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont is today, in terms of having reserves that are so depleted that we really risk not having enough money to pay all the claims for our members. There really isn't another scenario at this point for 2026 that I would be confident putting forward, because even with, and we can talk about this more in our confidential executive session, but even with the fully funded rates and an explicit price CTR of 7%, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont's recovery will only be sort of climbing above the regulatory levels. It really is not immediately putting back a bunch of extra cushion into reserves. So from that perspective, I don't see another scenario that would make sense.
Yeah, I'm trying to get a sense of, how we as a board and as a state can understand the role of a nonprofit insurer in our constrained market, right? And whether Vermonters, whether we're just telling them that here's what the math says, or whether they're being offered real consumer protection and real leadership in the face of these rapidly rising costs. So I'm hearkened to hear some of the steps that are being taken to address affordability. I still am left wondering if further modeling or maximizing the programmatic ROIs, as Member Holmes was talking about, or different ways of challenging provider pricing or different mitigation strategies. I'm still looking for those and trying to look at what's the role beyond actuarial soundness of a nonprofit insurance carrier in our state. So I appreciate you answering my questions, and I will turn it back to Mr. Barber.
Board Member Merman, do you have questions?
Yeah, thank you. I have a few. Hi, Ruth. Thanks. It's been a long morning, and you've been in that seat for quite a while. So I appreciate your continued engagement and concentration here. I just have a few questions. There are points in the record I could reference, but I think basically the question that I want to talk about is options that you and your organization have considered to try to figure out how to have plan designs or administer plans that lead to some cost containment, maybe some improved climate for controlling costs. Some of the things that have come up in my review of plans are some non-standard plan options, which allowed for tiered copays. Is that something Blue Cross has considered, having tiered copays related to the steering patients to lower cost or equal or higher quality alternatives?
Yeah, I know there's a work group that meets continuously around modifications to plans that can be done in the marketplace. You mentioned a non-standard plan option with tiered copays. I don't think we've proposed anything in that space. Recently, some of our preferred plans offered different types of copays. I don't know if this is what you mean by a tiered copay. Different options for people who had certain conditions so that we could encourage them to get the right care. I think one is pointed at cardiac conditions and another one is pointed at people who have diabetes. So from that perspective, we've put some of those options forward, and I do know that there's other innovations that we can consider around driving members, so to speak, directing members to certain locations. The reality is, though, in Vermont, we have most of our members will look to their provider for where they should get their care, and so there's been a limited amount of that to be done, but certainly we have it on our radar scope as an opportunity, and interested in looking at other benefit designs that might make sense. But yeah, the tiered copays, there's a lot of different types of flavors of that, and we've done a couple of toes in the water, if you will, in that space. But there's probably more that we could consider.
When you've dipped your toes in the water, have you seen different behaviors among those members as to their utilization patterns that steer towards lower cost, higher quality?
We've had a lot of sort of the basic programs around helping people make a determination how not to go to the ER if they don't need to, and so on and so forth. And that's we've seen good results with that. We've noticed that when we don't promote that, we can see maybe that the patterns reemerge. But in terms of the tiered copays, I'd have to take that back and ask our marketing and product people if they've been able to correlate the people who select the preferred plans, if they are in fact changing the behaviors. It could be that they were already doing it and they're taking advantage of the plan because it acknowledges that good work that they're already doing. So again, distinguishing which is sometimes hard to do, but we can certainly share more of our findings in that space in the future.
Thank you. I guess this kind of gets back into maybe the budget neutrality questions, but maybe, and I think I'm going to save most of that for Mr. Garland, but one of the responses to the questions we have, it's exhibit 15, page 4, that hospitals have shown little appetite for taking on risk, especially full risk contracts. I guess I'm trying to understand that concept in the concept of budget, the mention of the concept of budget neutrality, which to me actually seems like almost approaching a global budget, insofar as there is a certain amount of revenue that a hospital is expecting to get, regardless of the services provided. Now, do you think that's a fair characterization of the budget neutrality concept, or are there other components to that that are different than sort of the global budget concept?
Yeah, that's definitely a good question for Andrew Garland, but my sense is that the global budget is a cap on both like the cost and the utilization. Like, you're going to see our members, and no matter what they need, this is the amount that's being paid. I think that revenue neutrality historically has been like, set utilization aside, we need to ensure that the rate increases are balancing back to what's been approved in the budget. So my sense is that the utilization assumption is the big piece that's been missing up to this point, in the sense that a hospital or a provider, we were just talking about it moments ago, could bill a lot more services, and somehow that's not been considered part of the total payment. That's considered, increased utilization, of course we'll pay for that. So I think it's not far from, the two concepts are not far from one another, but there's some pretty basic components in a global budget that would have to be a cap that includes both or all three, the cost, the utilization, and the intensity. And I think that's the piece that has kind of not been accounted for in the contract negotiations, because that's been highly focused on the unit cost piece.
Okay, and I'll defer most of it to Mr. Garland, but when I think about this and all the discussion about claims, denials and trying to do some quality improvement programs and having to kind of, if you're taken from here, then it has to go to there. That seems like a very administratively expensive process to me on both Blue Cross's side, but also the hospital side. Do you have an idea of the percentage of these QHP administrative costs that are associated with claims denials, claims edits, all these various price negotiations that if you've got a cap or if you've got a fixed budget, why is all this work going on underneath it to sort of go back and forth? Do you have an idea of the percent of the administrative costs that are spent on those various components?
Yeah, a lot of the billing processes are automated, and what we're doing is looking at outliers and patterns, et cetera. So we're not manually dealing with all of that work. Our contracting team that does the hundreds of hours of work that we mentioned earlier in this hearing, those are, we have a very small contracting team, count them on one hand, and those people are taking care of all the contracting negotiations. So I would agree with you that there's a lot of energy applied to these past practices that really have not gotten us to where we need to be, that we could apply in a different way. My sense is that it's not a huge portion of our operating expenses. I can certainly share with the board what we spend on the resources for the contract reconciliations, and some of the claims monitoring that we do. But it's not huge, but I certainly can share it.
That'd be helpful. With regards to, I just have a few more sort of spot questions here that are just add-ons from, I think, what other people had asked going last. I get that advantage. With regards to the board of Blue Cross Blue Shield Michigan and Blue Cross Blue Shield Vermont, would it be possible for the board of Blue Cross Blue Shield Vermont to relinquish control to Blue Cross Blue Shield Michigan?
That's a legal question that I wouldn't know the answer to. Certainly happy to follow up with that.
Yeah, I would appreciate that if there was a situation where Blue Cross Blue Shield Vermont board could basically surrender its control of operations to Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan, and thus be a board just in name only. Thanks. All right. With regards to the infusion programs, I think we've had a bit of a discussion about this. It sounds, my impression from reading the record is that Blue Cross Blue Shield has worked on developing a home infusion program for members to get infusion services at home, as opposed to going to the hospital-administered, physician-administered infusions. Conceptually speaking, that provides significant benefit to those patients, so they can get their services at home and don't have to go through the process of going to the infusion center. And it provides them at a lower cost, theoretically, because you're not paying the hospital-administered fees. The recent legislative action in this area applies only to the hospital-administered infusions, but not the home infusions, is my understanding. So there could still be, could you, it seems reasonable to me that a hospital may look to increase their home infusion offerings in order to avoid the ASP cap because it doesn't apply to home infusions. Is that something that you have considered in modeling regarding the ASP benefit, the prescription drug benefit here?
Yeah, I'm smiling because there's been a number of conversations internally about as we implement this Act 55, how do we monitor, what's happening and make sure that, there's compliance with Act 55. And there's been a fair amount of brainstorming around how many other different ways can we see the possibility of services shifting to sort of avoid, if you will, the requirements of the Act. So we will be watching for that. Certainly, it also, I'll connect that back to one of my points in my testimony, that the estimates that we've made about the impact of Act 55 assumes that, there may be some little shift in where services are administered, but we're assuming that, the vast majority of those savings will come through because of the limit on the drug prices. But if there's a major shift in how the services are presented to members, we'll need to be cognizant of that. And there's been a number of ideas put forward. Off the top of my head, I don't recall the other ones, but the one that you describe is a very good one, that if there's an exception to the Act and there's an opportunity, we do need to keep our eyes out for that. We also are cognizant, if there's facilities outside of Vermont that are subject to Act 55, we're cognizant of watching the shifts that might happen there. So that's just a really good example of the reality of when a new rule goes into place and people work with a new rule. We all have to keep an eye out for things that might be the unintended consequence of. I mean, home infusions in general are probably a good thing for, I can speak from personal family experience that it is a very good experience, but it does take the resources to do it in the home, and very much could shift the market. And bottom line is, I think we're going to be monitoring and watching the patterns to see what actually happens.
Yeah, I agree with I think this might be an interesting shift to home infusions, which may provide a lot of patient benefit and patient experience benefit and convenience.
I'm Brett McKay, founder and editor.
So, just a couple more quick questions on Exhibit 18, page 15. This is the L&E memo, and it talks about the unit cost increases for pharmacy trend, and for generics, it's 10%, but for 4%, but for all others, it was 10%. And I was just trying to get an idea of, it seemed, I read the record, but 10 is a very round number. And I was trying to understand, other than sort of like a guess, if that 10% is something that you have some real insight to, especially if you're talking about the Michigan affiliation and increased leverage with drug purchasing. If you could comment on this 10% increase for unit cost.
Yeah, this is very clearly in Martine Brisson-Lemieux's space. I think she would be much more appropriate to comment on the 10% and the background on that.
Yep, that's good point. Sorry about that. And then on Exhibit 17, page 2, and I guess this was a question that potentially may have been asked by the HCA. It's question number 6. In the last paragraph there, it says, Vermont's healthcare costs continue to increase. Eventually, without a reduction in healthcare costs, healthcare insurance will not be viable for the majority of Vermonters, and the premium base will continue to erode, threatening the viability of the health insurance market. So, and I can give you a second to read that as well, if you want. I guess when I was reading this, it struck me that the word viable and affordable almost could be superimposed. And if you would think about the term viability and affordability in the context of this, and if you had any thoughts about this if the costs of insurance continue to rise, it's just not going to be affordable. It's not viable. We can sort of nuance the language on this, but basically, as we see with the end of if the ACTP goes away, people will not be able to afford, or at least perceive they can afford health insurance to the point where they would drop coverage. Thus, we're changing the dynamics of the insurance markets. So anyways, I was wondering if you could sort of speak to the sort of interplay between these concepts of viability and affordability with these rising healthcare costs.
Yes, I think if you read that paragraph all the way to the end, it sort of speaks to that we believe that really we all need to be committed to figuring out ways to reduce the underlying costs. And I think the hearing started, I think it was the HCA, Charles Becker, who said, you know, there was a call to action in last fall. We've had this long run up to the rate hearing. And I think part of it is because this can't continue. It just can't continue this way. And whether you call it viability or affordability or something else, it really is a call to action that Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont is very committed to working with all the stakeholders to figure this out, because it really can't sustain. We can't continue this way.
Thank you, Ms. Green. That's all I have right now.
All right. Bridget, any redirect for Ms. Green on public materials?
Not at this time, thank you.
Okay. So we are at 12:15. I'd like to push on through the commissioner's public testimony before we take probably a half an hour lunch break. So Commissioner Sampson, are you here and ready to testify?
I am, thank you.
Thank you. And is Jesse Lucier here as well?
I am.
Okay, I understand you both wanted to be sworn in, and Jesse, you may answer some questions if that's needed. Is that accurate?
Correct.
Okay, so I will swear you both in at this time. Could you please raise your right hands? Do you solemnly swear that the evidence you shall give relative to the cause now under consideration shall be the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
I do.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Please go ahead.
Okay, I don't have extensive statements. The solvency opinion, I think, speaks for itself, and I'm looking forward to answering your questions on that. I would like to go over the department approach to these solvency opinions, but also overall to our role among many regulators in the healthcare delivery system. I want to start, I'm going to reference, and it's not too lengthy, but I want to read from Title 8, Section 10, which is the declaration of policy for this department. I'm the Commissioner of Insurance, Securities, Banking, and Captives. So we have the lion's share of financial services. Today I'm speaking to, obviously, in my role as overseeing the insurance division, which is also overseen by Deputy Mary Block and a whole staff of financial analysts and examiners, of which Jesse is one of them. The direct declaration of policy in section 10 says the business of organizations that offer financial services and products shall be supervised by the commissioner in a manner to assure the solvency, liquidity, stability, and efficiency of all such organizations to assure reasonable and orderly competition, thereby encouraging the development, expansion, and availability of financial services and products advantageous to the public welfare, and to maintain close cooperation with other supervisory authorities. Part 2, all such organizations shall be supervised in such a way as to protect consumers against unfair and unconscionable practices and to provide consumer education. So I started at the department, I think it was 2006, and in the insurance division in a role similar to what Jesse Lucier does, if not identical. I was the primary financial analyst and examiner for Blue Cross Blue Shield in Vermont, along with some other companies. At that time, it was BISHCA, Banking, Insurance, Securities, and Healthcare Administration, before a lot of the more policy and rate making authorities around healthcare were shifted. I then took a eight and a half year hiatus from insurance and am now back as commissioner. And imagine my surprise to come back and really deep dive into some of the top issues department-wide, not just in the insurance division, but to see that Blue Cross Blue Shield is in the financial position that they are in was, it's not that I didn't, read the newspaper or read the media while I was away from state government, but I certainly wasn't following it closely until I agreed to come back as commissioner. And I emphasize that because I want to emphasize the very tenuous nature of where they are at in terms of their solvency. As Ms. Green stated, and I wholeheartedly agree, and I'm very concerned about, they are not in a position to withstand another year of the same amount of loss that they most recently reported just in the QHP. The losses that they've seen, that this is their biggest block of business that's at risk, meaning they fully underwrite and bear the risk. But those trends we're seeing in self-insured, the trends of claim costs we're seeing in self-insured groups, and we're also seeing them with other insurers. So yes, there is protection provided by, I don't know the act number, but 482. That protection is limited to paying providers or hospitals that meet a certain solvency standard of their own or days cash on hand. And with a broad-based claim surge or experiences has been seen in recent years with the QHP, that would mitigate some problems. But if we got to that point, it would most likely be a situation where just that alone might slow a decline, further decline in RBC. So anyway, that's kind of in anticipating a similar question that Ms. Green had received around, how do you incorporate that into understanding how much solvency protection or how much contribution to reserve might be necessary? Because we asked the same question, do we have a different opinion in terms of what's an adequate or necessary contribution to reserve, given that there's this new power on the table provided by that by that legislation. So I think, I just want to address affordability briefly. I looked at last year's testimony from Commissioner Gaffney and Mr. Lucier's additions to that. Commissioner Gaffney discussed the history of RBC risk-based capital. He discussed that that's filed annually. So the last audited or risk-based capital based on audited numbers and year-end numbers still is year-end 2014. we do receive updates, and we're probably in contact on average bi-weekly, myself or the staff, with Blue Cross, monitoring the financial situation. Commissioner Gaffney discussed the 4 levels of risk-based capital and the varying regulatory involvement. Discussed the importance of the QHP market, the importance of having a competitive market, which with 2 players, you're at a bare minimum of any form of competition there. And he characterized affordability or an affordable rate as the lowest adequate rate. And I think at a high level, that's somewhat rings true to me as well. But it brings the next question, which is, well, what's an adequate rate? And something I believe is in the solvency opinion as well that I want to emphasize is that these rates, whether it be the rate derived from understanding utilization or cost trends, or the requested contribution to surplus, contribution to reserves, all have confidence intervals of actually occurring. Ms. Green mentioned that the approved 7% for current year plans in QHP is panning out at thus far at 4% contribution to reserve. So 3%, even filing during some financial duress and understanding the claims environment, there was uncertainty. And that's what insurers do. They price for uncertainty. And even with all the knowledge that occurred exactly a year ago, they're only realizing 4 of their 7% contribution to reserve. So for me, I look at a contribution to reserve, and my quoted vigorously defending it or vigorously recommending we stick with that, because it's not just a contribution to reserve in my eyes. It is a increased confidence that the rate overall will be adequate. Affordability is really important, and it's absolutely a crisis. And by most measures, I would say healthcare costs in this state have not been affordable for anyone for many, many years. That's just kind of from a layman's point of view. One way to look at affordability as well in the insurance rate space, is this an affordable rate relative to the actual anticipated cost of care? I understand insurers, and we've talked about it this morning, or it's been talked about this morning, insurers have many tools they can use to influence utilization, patient behavior, or member behavior. But at the end of the day, at its most basic level, insurers are paying the claims sent to them by a patient who seeks care and receives care. It's hard to get around the cost of care. I think Blue Cross Blue Shield is running at about 6% admin rate. So 94 of the dollars on a perfectly tuned rate are going to care approximately, including pharmacy, et cetera. So you're looking at a company that has actually paid more than the cost of care in this market in several years. There are two recent years off the top of my head with $36 and $39 million losses in this market. So it's important to think of those years as contributions to surplus, contributions to reserve, filed in the positive, but experienced in the negative. I think one of those, I did a quick math, was a 13% loss on the entire block. So it's important to think in terms of whether that was 2 or 3 years ago, that was a negative 13% contribution to surplus that year. I think it's important to think about that relative to the request for a 7% contribution to reserve this year. It's also important to think about the fact that that would pan out to about $36 million of contribution to reserve if the board grants the 7% contribution to reserve. That is within $1 million of how much they lost on the QHP last year. Yeah, so I think that generally outlines the role of the department here, but also our department's approach and my and maybe some context around why I was very adamant about the criticality of this moment and this recovery of Blue Cross's solvency in my solvency opinion. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Does Blue Cross have questions for the commissioner?
No, we do not. Thank you.
Does the HCA have questions?
Yes, we have a few questions. They'll be quick. Hi, Commissioner Sampson. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So really quickly, and I don't want this to come off in the wrong way, but I just heard what you said just now, and I didn't sound quite right to me. So I just want to start off with, I think you said something like for several years of the years where Blue Cross was showing losses, that effectively was them paying more than the cost of care. Did I hear you? I think that's what I heard. Maybe I misheard it because we're 4 hours into a hearing and I'm hungry for lunch.
I don't know. I'd have to rewind the tape, but if I said that, thank you for pointing it out, because that's not what I meant to express. I think what I meant to express is that the cost of care was more than Blue Cross collected, obviously, by a large amount, leading to the concept of negative contribution to surplus in those markets during those years.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Well, I might have misheard it. Who knows? Quickly on your solvency letter, page 4. You say DFR uses several tools to assess surplus adequacy, including review of quarterly financial statements that are filed by a company, periodic financial examinations, corporate governance review, and an analysis of areas such as RBC. What I was curious about, and I'm just I'm curious about this, and if you could quickly, in layman's terms, explain what is a financial examination or a corporate governance review. What does that consist of? Just quickly in layman's terms.
Try to be quick, but it is quite comprehensive. So Vermont is an NAIC accredited state. So we follow what's called the Financial Condition Examiner's Handbook, and we have supervisory and regulatory laws in statute that are model laws and necessary for accreditation that involve comprehensive financial analysis and examination, using a pretty detailed and prescriptive method published in this Financial Condition Examiner's Handbook. Our law in Vermont says that every insurance company that we regulate, so every domestic insurer, including Blue Cross Blue Shield, to be examined at least every 3 years according to that handbook and methodology, and that time can be expanded to 5 years. That is a risk-based examination approach, and essentially it starts from the ground up at every period in saying what are the top risks facing this organization, strategic, underwriting risk, investment risk, etc. The examiners and the exam team, and we do use outside experts for this on the IT side, on the investment side, and supplement it with examiners, financial examiners as well where necessary. But essentially, it's a risk-based approach based on the knowledge of the industry, the markets, and the periodic analysis, which happens at least quarterly for our domestic companies. And it's pretty intense. It can take 3 to 6 months of actual field work and getting through all the different financial aspects of the company. And that can include a governance review, usually relying on experts that would work for the department and understand whether certain decisions are governed properly, going to the board where appropriate, etc. Sorry,
Okay.
that wasn't brief.
No, it's brief enough, and certainly, I mean, was helpful for me. You sort of answered my next question and the last question on this particular piece. Every 3 to 5 years, you need to conduct these examinations or reviews. When was the last time prior to the current crisis that DFR conducted a financial examination or corporate governance review of Blue Cross Vermont? Do you know?
Jesse, that one's going to go to you.
Sure. The last full exam was for the 5-year period ending December 31st, 2020. Work starts in 2021, usually goes into 2022. And Blue Cross is set up for, I think their next exam will be 2025. In the interim, we are allowed to conduct what's called target or limited scope exams. And the department is currently in process of one of those related to the claims.
Okay, thank you. So the last real full look back at Blue Cross, it sounds like was to 2020. That's the last real period of insight you have.
I wouldn't say it's the last period of insight, because during analysis and just routinely through the year, we generally have meetings with Blue Cross for a variety of reasons.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, and I want to, if I can, emphasize that point, because as you asked the question, I'm glad Jesse responded the way he did, because part of those same accreditation procedures that we follow, dictated by the NAIC, are pretty intensive analysis of the financial results and financial statements, both quarterly and annually, including, I think, outside at full authority to bring in outside consultants for that to where appropriate. And I should also add that the relationship with Blue Cross Blue Shield always has, during my prior time here, and I'm pleased to learn it has continued, very transparent, and they generally pick up the phone and provide insight to us about what's coming in a quarterly financial report, financial statement, which is, these are also public, but we get a heads up before we see things printed and get a discussion in context and opportunity to dive deeper or request action.
And I'll also add that during the affiliation process, the kind of corporate governance review also took place.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
The next question should be even quicker. So Exhibit 15, I don't know if you have a binder even, but I'll tell you Exhibit 15 was board questions sent to Blue Cross to answer prior to the hearing. And on page 25 of that exhibit, there's a question 15, please provide a copy of the findings from the recent audit. And the response from Blue Cross was that the audit is not complete. It's still ongoing, and we do not have the final filings. So my question is, the first one is, what is the nature of this audit that you're conducting of Blue Cross, that the Department of Financial Regulation is conducting?
That, Jesse, I think that's probably the claims review that you discussed. Do you know?
Yeah, I believe that's referencing the claims exam, which is a targeted or limited scope exam.
So,
I think the purpose of, go ahead.
Oh, is this the claim surge, related to the claim surge? Trying to figure out what that was, or?
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
So I think at the briefest level, to understand that for us to use an independent expert to review the claims adjudication practices of Blue Cross, but also to verify that some of the findings that, or the readout that Blue Cross had given the department around the sources and drivers of that, or even just their own analysis of the claim surge, that that those numbers could be relied upon by us in interpreting what happened, or that those numbers were, fair and reasonable, et cetera. Does that sound about right, Jesse? Is there more you want to add?
Nope, that sounds good.
And how complete is that audit? When do you expect to have final findings?
I'll leave that for you, Jesse.
We have a meeting next week with the contract examiners where we'll review preliminary reports, and I expect a final report shortly after that.
Okay. And since this was asked as a board question in this rate review hearing, and the response was, well, we don't have the findings yet, I assume, I mean, it's a little awkward for me to be asking this, I'm not on the board, but that you would, what Blue Cross would, supplement that response and provide the results of that audit to the board, and that as a result of that, the HCA, a party to these proceedings, would be able to access and see the results of that audit.
I'd leave, well, are you asking if DFR will provide our results to the board and to the HCA? The results of our claims?
Yeah, in a very roundabout way. That's what I'm getting at. Yeah, yeah.
I hadn't anticipated that question. I think there might, I'd have to say this is my first Green Mountain Care Board hearing, so I'm still kind of getting comfortable or understanding what confidential really means. Because the circle's a lot bigger than the last time I was, in regulation. So unless I know Russ McCracken is on council for myself in the department, or Jesse, has this already been discussed? Other than that, I'll have to get back to you on that. But
that's fair enough, and I'll take that response. Thank you.
All right.
Yep. Yep. That's all I had. I'm sorry.
Next, we'll move to questions from board members, starting with Board Member Holmes.
Great. Thank you so much. It's nice to see you, Commissioner. Nice to see you, Mr. Lucier. I do have a few questions, and actually one of those questions was to be, can we see that audit report when it's done? So now you have two requests for the same audit report. But I wanted to talk a little bit about your memo. So you state in your memo that if Blue Cross Blue Shield's RBC ratio were to decrease further, it would risk triggering more severe regulatory actions. Can you walk us through the statutory authorities and levers that DFR has over Blue Cross Blue Shield management and contracting at certain key trigger points? What can DFR do to intervene?
currently, or if things go the wrong way?
I guess both, currently, and if things go south, further south.
So currently they're at company action level, and if I get terminology wrong, Jesse, please chime in for any reason. But currently that is the kind of the first level or RBC trigger that gives us the authority to require an RBC plan or a plan for recovery, which you heard referenced in Ms. Green's testimony. And we can approve that plan, or we can request other actions out of that plan. And that occurred before I came on as commissioner, and I think in the fall of last year, they submitted a plan. The next step, I believe, is regulatory. Sorry, I was trying to bring up my cheat sheet on that. Regulatory action level. These are all in the same piece of statute definitions. At regulatory action level, I'm sorry, you got to let me pause and find, like I said, my cheat sheet on that. Unless you know them by heart there, Jesse.
Yeah, the regulatory action level would be 150% RBC ratio. In addition to the risk based capital plan, the regulation gives the department authority to issue corrective orders. What form those would take would depend on the circumstances. At 100%
And
RBC.
sorry to jump in there, Jesse, but I think as I opened with, although we have seen exercise of this type of authority on the captive side, this is, for my memory, this is a first for Vermont domestics, and I highlight that to highlight that it's not taken lightly, and it is a severe situation in terms of one of our domestics being at these action levels. So anyway, go ahead, continue, Jesse.
Sure. At 100% RBC, there's something called the authorized control level, which authorizes DFR to place a company under regulatory control if deemed necessary. Regulatory control could mean supervision, could mean rehabilitation or liquidation, again, depending on the circumstances. And then the final one is if an RBC ratio hits 70%, mandatory control is required by the department.
Okay, so it sounds like Blue Cross Blue Shield was in regulatory action level where corrective orders could be made. Were any corrective?
They were
orders
in the
made?
company action level.
But when they hit below 150, are you counting the surplus note? Or
Yeah,
in
the surplus note
Okay.
counts, yeah. So,
Okay,
yeah.
And I think there's also a distinction in potentially in filed RBC. So their 2023 RBC did not hit any action levels. And correct me if I'm wrong.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just got a text that some folks have lost audio. We could just take a. Go ahead.
Sorry, Hearing Officer Barber. This is Bridget AC. We did lose it for a few minutes. We did just get it back.
Okay.
So we're okay for now.
All right. Sorry. Just go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. So I believe what precipitated the RBC action plan and the company action level was mid-year degradation of the RBC ratio as projected by Blue Cross Blue Shield. I think, Jesse, can you confirm that?
That's correct.
So that what that allowed was before the next filed RBC statement, which was 12/31/24, the company was able to get support from the loan from Michigan, and that's a unique statutory accounting or statutory reporting feature, a surplus note, which does allow a loan to count as surplus if certain conditions are met. And as was referenced earlier by Ms. Green, those conditions include my approval necessary to pay any principal or interest back to the lender, which is Michigan. So by the time they filed 12/31/24, the note was able to keep them out of regulatory action level, and they stayed in company action level.
okay. So that it was a choice. Is it a DFR choice whether to count the surplus note in its assessment of what level Blue Cross Blue Shield is at?
We may have some discretion on that, but I would not be surprised to be challenged on that because a surplus note is a defined in statutory accounting guidance. So as far as I know, the review of that note met all the conditions of the accounting guidance. So the commissioner at the time, Commissioner Gaffney, would have been departing from the accounting and reporting guidance to disallow that as surplus.
Okay. In the event that it gets to a level of, say, a mandatory control level event, does it sound, it sounds like DFR would have the ability to engage in payer contracting, take over payer contracting, renegotiate rates?
Yes. I mean, essentially, we would appoint experts, and I'll add that they are not cheap. There are not a team of insurance operations or executive folks at the DFR where taking control just means Jesse and Karen and folks in the insurance divisions will start running an insurance company in addition to their duties. So what you'll find every state does in a situation like this is appoint a supervisor, a rehabilitator, or a liquidator, and that person is granted at the right action level pretty extraordinary authority to essentially run the company, replace management as necessary, basically make all the decisions of management, including approaches on contracting.
Okay. It does sound like you mentioned that there is a claims review going on. Are you personally aware of the fraudulent bills submitted to Blue Cross Blue Shield, or the systematic overbilling or billing misaligned with payment policy, or deviations from GMCB budget orders that Ms. Green testified about?
I am aware of their looking into that. Yes.
Okay.
I have not determined that anything from my perspective that anything's fraudulent.
Have you been able to determine whether something is misbilled? I think there's degrees of deviations from appropriate billing, fraudulent, and then maybe something less than that, misbilling. Have you deemed any of the billing to be inappropriate billing?
I think at this point, we haven't dug into those details. We're in communications with Blue Cross Blue Shield as they come to their own conclusions on it, but we haven't done an independent, DFR has not done an independent review of what Blue Cross has seen, alleged, et cetera. And we haven't, and I'm not sure we would at this point in time.
Okay, but let me ask you this. As the regulator charged with consumer protection and insurer solvency, do you have the authority or the responsibility to review those payments and stop Blue Cross Blue Shield from paying erroneous bills, or to force recovery of erroneous overpayments?
Yes, I could
You
go
could do
there.
that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, there's a lot of places, and I think the care board's in a similar position. There's a lot of authority that can be exercised, and there's also a recourse, that can include challenging whether it's practical, feasible, economically efficient to do such a thing. Are we equipped to do what you're ordering us to do, et cetera? So with all of those nuances and caveats, I believe the honest answer is yes, those authorities exist.
And if you were to do that, it would be without regard for hospital stances on budget neutrality. It would be looking at these bills and whether these bills were inappropriate and erroneously charged.
I agree with that. Yep.
Okay. Another area of questioning I just have is, in your opinion, thinking about solvency, should QHP members face higher CTRs than required to fully fund their plan in order to help offset losses incurred in other Blue Cross Blue Shield products?
That's a hypothetical, since the CTR requested comes nowhere near restoring the money lost in the QHP. So the cumulative losses, or what I would characterize earlier as negative contributions to surplus, or essentially Blue Cross's surplus serving as a not intentional but a unintentional subsidy to the QHP rates over the years. I take your question to be in the hypothetical, because that's not what a 7% CTR in this rate would represent. I'd also want to say that my understanding is the company, with the one exception related to medical loss ratio that Ms. Green gave, is across the board looking for similar, if not identical, contributions to surplus. And also want to emphasize a point based on one of Chair Foster's questions relevant to this, which was given in response by Ms. Green, which is the contribution to the reserve itself, as in the RBC framework. they're different lines of business drive different reserve need. So the QHP is a fully underwritten classic insurance product where Blue Cross Blue Shield bears the risk. Self-insured program or a CBA, those programs, Blue Cross has a much more limited exposure, severely much more limited, right? It's just the admin costs they're agreeing to. Maybe there's a stop loss insurance. So the charge or the need for capital in the RBC calculation is much more heavy, much more loaded into the QHP. So the need for reserve is to the need for surplus at the company is to act as a buffer against the uncertainty when you take on large hundreds of millions of dollars of risks as they have. So I think that is why.
Let me ask, so if there's certain loss anticipated that's going to draw down reserves, should that be funded by QHP members? Certain loss drawing down reserves in other areas of the business, should that loss be funded, in part subsidized by QHP members?
Again, that sounds hypothetical to me. I mean, if you
Okay,
could give me an
maybe
example.
I'll wait. Yeah, I'll
Okay.
wait for the executive session. I think
Okay.
maybe that's the best approach there. Just a couple of more questions, and then I don't want, I'm going to give others a chance. But Ms. Green testified that the RBC recovery plan is designed to reach a target RBC in 2 to 3 years. If RBC continued to increase each year, but it took 4 years instead of 3 to reach that target, in order to balance our issues of solvency and affordability, would that still be reasonable in light of the current affordability climate? So RBC is growing, but maybe it takes 4 years instead of 3 to get to a particular target in that recovery plan.
And the question is, would that be reasonable?
Yes.
My answer is that it may be reasonable, but it also would be, you'd have to consider the additional risk one was taking, that we have a repeat of the last couple of years in the QHP. So everything that becomes a suppression of any rate here, including the contribution to reserve, by its nature increases the likelihood that this rate is inadequate. And how inadequate, depending on what type of negative experience we see in the future. Again, if we see what we've seen in the recent years, Blue Cross just cannot withstand that. Whereas when it happened to them a couple of years ago, they were north of 500% when things started to go south. So that shock absorber, as Attorney D'Onofrio put it, is not there anymore. So again, I wouldn't disagree that 4 years for rebuilding versus 3 years is not unreasonable. However, it comes with it the risk of a higher risk of insolvency, frankly. And insolvency is not something we want, regardless of the control.
I don't think there's anybody that wants insolvency. We want solvency and we want affordability, and that's a very difficult needle to thread. Okay, those are my final questions. Thank you very much for answering them. I appreciate it. And back to you, Mr. Barber.
All right, Chair Foster.
Just a couple of questions. Commissioner Sampson, nice to see you. I just want to put in context your solvency letter and understand what you're getting at. You're not suggesting the board approve a 23.3% rate increase, are you?
I'm suggesting the board approve a 7% contribution to reserves.
Right. Okay. And that's all your opinion goes to is the CTR?
It also mentions not deviating. Essentially, other portions of the rate need to be actuarially supported, and I believe I have language in there that, in layman's terms, is essentially what you heard from Blue Cross this morning, that they need to be bankable. If there are changes, for instance, 482 created some changes. Lewis and Ellis has some observations.
If these are kind of mathematical, actuarially supported changes on the base rate, that doesn't concern me. What concerns me is things that are judgmental, aspirational, based on future events that have a probability of not occurring, leaving essentially, like as I was just saying to Ms. Holmes, increasing the likelihood that we have another inadequate rate is what concerns me, whether that be on the CTR or the underlying components of the rate.
And can you explain the department's analysis of why 7% is correct for CTR instead of 6 or 8 or 4 or 9?
Again, it's our analysis is, does this bring Blue Cross on a path towards greater stability in a time frame that we think is appropriate and provide an appropriate buffer for that uncertainty that we have seen very, very acutely exists in this block of business.
So why not 8% or 9% or 6%?
Why not 8%? Because we give some deference to Blue Cross Blue Shield in asking for 7%, knowing that they believe they are the stewards of their surplus, and they believe that 7% is accurate, and an hour or it is a good compromise of all those factors. And then our job is to say, do we find that excessive or unnecessary? We do not.
Right. And then did DFR do any analysis or review of the losses to RBC from other segments and operations of BCBS's business in connection with its solvency opinion?
Yes.
Can you explain that?
So we're aware of other losses and other factors that have contributed to the RBC decline over the last several years.
And how did you consider those in connection with the solvency opinion? Let me ask you another way. Did your review of those factors have any impact on the solvency opinion?
To the extent that all factors that reduced RBC helped put Blue Cross in the position that they're in, yes. Not sure if that answers your question.
Well, it's just sort of trying to understand the math on that supports DFR's position on 7%. And there's a whole number of factors that have contributed to RBC losses. I'm trying to understand in context of the DFR opinion, whether or not those other factors played a role in the opinion that 7% was the right amount.
Yeah, I think I get it, your question a little bit better now. I think had I seen that the QHP, that the filings before you had been generating surplus for the company over the years in a significant way, or even just a marginal modest way, and that due to other factors outside of that specific line of business, which is a huge one, they needed to find a contribution to surplus of 7%, or needed to get a contribution to restore monies that never even came out of this line of business. I likely would have thought about it differently. Again, that becomes a hypothetical as well. But if you look at the cumulative losses within this, in hindsight, last year's rates were made very affordable because $36 million, they were underfunded by $36 million. So, that even as high as the QHP products are, they were underpriced in hindsight from an actuarial point of view in terms of what actually happened in terms of utilization and cost.
All right, so it looks like over 2020 to 2024, it's somewhere around $69 million in losses on QHP. And I take it to be your suggestion that they should be allowed to make up for that loss over the next several years. But what about the business lines that have lost relatively comparable amounts of money, at least MA? Should QHP in the future make up for those MA losses? It doesn't appear from the MA market to me that there'll be an opportunity to make up for that $50 million. So if Blue Cross is still, and the commission is still trying to get, or the department's still trying to get Blue Cross into that range, who's going to make up that 50 million? Because I don't think it's going to happen out of the MA market.
Right. It's a pickle. Neither DFR or the Green Mountain Care Board have rate authority on Med Advantage. There, I think, very generally speaking, the company's surplus and its financial position is the company's surplus and financial position. And to really, to start to do an attribution analysis of where the loss came or how they got here, I think clearly the history shows that unexpected claims development and experience and costs in the QHP market are a major contributing factor. You just cited the number. But, surplus, how far back do you go? You look at investment income, you look at investment losses, attributing it to a certain policyholder. Well, you overpaid or you underpaid, and therefore, I do generally take the approach, and the department does, that surplus is surplus. And but again, I do acknowledge that if this had been a profitable line of business all the way through, and then all of a sudden the company was trying to restore surplus from other losses, very clean and distinct elsewhere, I probably would have thought of this differently. Again, that's a hypothetical territory because that's not the case that I see in front of me.
I agree, surplus is surplus, except to the people paying the surplus. To them, it matters.
Agreed, but those folks, also paid a negative surplus in prior years, right?
Agreed. So one of the concerns I raised earlier was that this won't be enough again, right? We've seen this a couple times. And you said that essentially QHP got a good deal. I don't think they felt that way. The claims costs were higher. I understand the point. But do you have confidence that this money won't, be gobbled up and gone again if we were to give it?
I do not. I'm very concerned about that. It is my opinion that this healthcare system, as it's set up, requires major reform and major action that's going to be uncomfortable for everybody. But clearly, things are not working.
Okay, I have nothing else. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Board Member Walsh, do you have questions for the commissioner?
Yes, thank you, and good afternoon, Commissioner.
Hello.
I share your concerns about the structure of our healthcare system. You mentioned earlier in calculations regarding solvency, there are confidence intervals around those calculations. Would you be willing to share any confidence intervals from your calculations with us?
I think what's best is your next witness, the actuary, can talk about that, and your outside actuaries, Lewis and Ellis, in terms of specific levels of risk that an appetite that they're willing to take in a rate or in a rate recommendation.
So no confidence intervals from your department?
We are not independently calculating confidence intervals. That's more of a spectrum or a philosophy we look at in terms of where a rate is requested, where there might be some areas to move it left or right, up and down. It's just, I look at that more as in the insurance space, just a mathematical fact. Everything's a prediction about what's going to happen next. And if you peg the prediction here, there's reasonable predictions there and there. But one thing that remains true is that as you deviate from that, whatever point you choose an anchor on, the confidence interval goes up and down, that will be adequate or excessive, depending what direction you're moving.
So, it sounds like you'd agree then that a range around a point estimate would be useful information for our discussions.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you. Next question. Should DFR's solvency review consider whether nonprofit insurers are doing all they reasonably can to protect Vermonters from unaffordable premiums?
I think our regulation, our regulatory approach should consider that. The solvency opinion is pretty dictated in law or reg in terms of what we're opining on. It's pretty bounded in that regard. But as a nonprofit insurer enabled by Vermont statute, certainly they have a different motive than profit.
Thank you. I guess that goes right into my final question. I'm wondering about where you see the role of a nonprofit status in helping resolve the tension between affordability and solvency.
I think whether that's in law or not, with my history of the department, we always thought of Blue Cross Blue Shield as Vermont and their unique status as also being a close and willing partner to both consumers but government in achieving the healthcare goals of the state. And those have changed. Blue Cross has seen the Dean era reforms, community rating, the disbanding of the HCA in favor of the Green Mountain Care Board, the attempt at single payer, and all along, more so than you'd expect from a private insurer, Blue Cross has been a partner to government and also in many ways considered the insurer of last resort. To that end, I think to directly answer your question, they're in it for the long haul for the people of the state of Vermont is their goal. And maybe to read between the lines of your question, it's like, is it inappropriate to use Blue Cross's surplus to subsidize rates for Vermont consumers? And I think that's a fair question to ask. I think when it's not appropriate is when it threatens the very survival of that nonprofit in terms of the ability to continue as a going concern.
Thank you. And
you're welcome.
Board Member Merman, do you have questions?
No, thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Sampson, Mr. Lucier. I have no further questions.
Ms. AC or Mr. Becker, is there any follow-on questions that you feel you need to ask?
I do not have any questions. Thank you, hearing officer.
Nothing from me.
Good, thanks.
It's great to go before lunch.
Speaking of which, it's sure we're all a little bit hungry. So like I said, we're running behind where I'd like to be at this point in the day. So we'll keep the lunch to half an hour, come back here at approximately 1:40. And then the plan would be to move into a non-public session to take direct and cross for confidential material related to Ruth Green and Commissioner Sampson's testimony. So that is the plan. Any concerns with that plan before we break? Okay. See everyone back here at 1:40. Thanks. Mr. Nafio, please call your next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Hearing Officer. Our next witness is Martine Brisson-Lemieux. Good afternoon, Ms.
Good
Lemieux.
afternoon.
Would you please state your name and your current position for the record?
My name is Martine Brisson Lemieux, and I am the Chief Actuary at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont.
And how long have you worked at Blue Cross as part of the actuarial team?
I joined Blue Cross's actuarial team in 2009.
Did you prepare and submit pre-filed testimony in this proceeding?
Yes.
And where does that sit in the binder?
My July 11 pre-filed testimony is Exhibit 22.
Was all the testimony contained in Exhibit 22 true and correct to the best of your knowledge at the time you submitted it?
Yes.
And is that still true today?
Yes.
Were you responsible for preparing the filings under review here this afternoon?
Yes, I was actively involved in the preparation of the filings, and I'm totally familiar with all aspects of the filings and the underlying rate development.
And the documents that make up the filings are exhibits 1 through 7 in the binders, correct?
Yes.
Did you certify the filings?
Yes, at the time of the filings, I certified that they meet all applicable and relevant actuarial standards of practice and that they comply with applicable state and federal law and regulations. And that certification holds through today.
Similarly, were you responsible for preparing all of the information and responses that Blue Cross submitted in response to the questions received from the board and from the board's actuary and from the HCA?
Yes, the response were either prepared under my direct supervision or by other Blue Cross departments, and I'm familiar with all aspects of the material and can address in depth the material directly related to the assumptions and methodologies in the filing.
And those materials, I believe, are exhibits 8 through 14, 15 through 17, and 30 in
Yes.
the binders, right? Great. And have you had a chance to review exhibits 18 and 19, which are the 2 reports that Lewis and Ellis produced?
Yes,
You're familiar with those reports?
I am.
And each report contained 5 recommendations concerning the 2 markets currently being reviewed, right?
Yes,
And it's the same set of 5 recommendations in both markets, right?
yes.
What is Blue Cross's position with respect to those recommendations?
We disagreed with 2. Well, we have a notice of disagreement with 2 issues on the recommendations. It's Exhibit 27 in the binder.
And okay, so and one of the items of disagreement had to do with medical utilization trend, right?
Yes.
Could you explain the disagreement there?
We disagree with the recommendation of reducing the utilization trend for mental health and substance use and specialty medication in the medical setting. The trend rates for those 2 service category has been higher than 4%, and we expect it to be higher than 4% through 2026.
And what was the other point that was raised in the notice? I'm not going to call it a disagreement because it was something else.
Right, it is not really a disagreement. So as in past years, right, LNE recommended that we update the projected rates for updated hospital budget information. And we agree that we should do that. And LNE said that we should also reflect the savings from Act 55. And we agree that we should do that. The reason we put in the disagreement is really to be able to incorporate our point that those savings, that those 2 components don't double count the savings around Act 55. And we address this really so that we can be clear around kind of our request that hospital budgets be clear around the implications of Act 55 on the commercial rate requests.
And did Lewis and Ellis address that topic? By that, I mean this double counting issue in the reports that they issued Monday regarding Blue Cross's AHP and large group filings?
Yes, they did.
And what did LNE say in those documents?
In both reports, they stated that the reduction for Act 55 should be included, but they note that it should not be double counted with changes in the hospital budgets.
You're familiar with section 1.3 of the actuarial memorandum, which is at page 3 of Exhibit 1, right?
Yes,
And that section discusses the laws, regulations, rules, and other legal authorities that the filing must comply with, correct?
yes,
In your professional opinion, do the filings comply with all of those requirements?
Yes,
And you're also familiar with section 1.8 at page 8 of Exhibit 1, right?
yes,
That section addresses the criteria guarding this board's review under 8 BSA 4062, right?
yes,
And in your professional opinion, do the filings comply with those criteria?
yes, they do.
That concludes my direct. Thank you.
Thank you for the brevity of that. Mr. Becker, do you have questions?
I do. Hi, Ms. Brisson-Lemieux. How are you?
I'm well.
Great.
How are you? How are you
I'm
holding
not-
up?
I'm hanging in there. Hanging in there. I'll also try to be brief. But at the same time, there's ground I want to cover with you. So I'm sure you're aware, you're familiar, there was a sharp drop in the Blue Cross small group enrollment from 2024 to 2025, down 31.6%, I believe, or 6,960 members. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Okay. And you're also aware, I'm sure, that MVP also experienced losses in the small group, and that across both Blue Cross and MVP it was roughly 4,000, a 4,000 net loss to the small group market, or roughly 10% over 2024 to 2025.
I don't have that number, but I trust you.
Okay. Thank you. At the same time that the individual market was up across both carriers, Blue Cross was up, I think, in the neighborhood of 700, and MVP was up in the neighborhood of 2,300 for a net gain of close to 3,000 people in the individual market. Do you trust me on that one as well?
I do.
Okay. So would it be fair to say then that from 2024 to 2025 that the premium shock of high premiums seemed to be contained to the small group? Is that a fair assessment?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And now we're going from 2025 to 2026. We've been talking about this for years, but now it's finally here. We have to assume those enhanced premium tax credits are gone. And that not only is the cliff at 400% FPL back, but that the subsidies below 400% FPL will be reduced, and those people will have to pay more for coverage on average. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay, so you've modeled, and this is from page 13 of your actuarial memorandum, that 3,017 or 12.6% of the in-force individual members for Blue Cross will leave the QHP market in 2026. Is that accurate?
That's our assumption, yes.
Yeah, and so those 3,017 Blue Cross members, they're likely to be some of the healthiest members, yes?
Yes.
Okay. This sentence from Blue Cross's response to HCA questions already got a little bit of traction this morning, but I want to come back to it for just a second. This is Exhibit 17, page 4, and it's page 2, the response to question 6, and the language that was brought up earlier and discussed a bit, and I just want to focus on again for one more second. Eventually, without a reduction in healthcare costs, health insurance will not be viable for the majority of Vermonters, and the premium base will continue to erode, threatening the viability of the health insurance market. Is that observation essentially the definition of a so-called death spiral?
Yes, that can be one interpretation of a debt spiral, yes.
Okay.
In the overall market, right? Usually that's used more on one particular carrier, one particular market.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, if we do not control the healthcare costs in Vermont, we're not going to be in a viable situation.
Okay. And so my last question on this topic is, when will we know that one of these markets, and let's just say it's the small group market, when will we know, what indicators will there be that that market is no longer viable?
I'm not sure. because a lot of the membership that we saw on the small group side, right, leave, found other coverage, other options, they have other options, or they went to MVP, right? And that happened, I believe in 2018, where a lot of our membership went to MVP, right? And through the years came back, and it's been sort of this balancing, right, of back and forth between the carriers. But again, it's all dependent on the healthcare costs, right? If we do something about those, we as a state, not we, you and me, we can curve that pattern.
The costs are important, no doubt, certainly, right? Are there any other things that can be done? Any other regulatory mechanisms? The market structure? I don't know. My boss will probably be upset with me for saying this. Age rating. What if we brought younger, healthier people back into the market? Is that something we could do?
I mean, age rating is allowed under the ACA, right? And it's something that Vermont hasn't done for 30 plus years, right? But the theory of age rating is that yes, costs would be lower for lower aged members, but that means that costs would be higher for older members, right? So it's not a fix-all sort of situation. And a lot of modeling would need to be done to understand how many more younger members would the pool get, right? And if it would be worth it against the additional cost pressures that it would put on older members.
Okay, thank you. That's very fair, and I appreciate that. You are lucking out. I had a whole big section planned on the affordability templates. I'm going to skip over that entire thing, and I'm going to jump over. I want to ask you very quickly about the matched population methodology that you're no longer using. So, and this, matched population methodology, way over my head. So I just want to ask you some very simple questions about it. You said in the actuarial memo that you're no longer using this methodology because the matched population utilization statistics were not aligned with the overall population and produced results that were not reasonable. That's from page 19 of Exhibit 1. Does that sound familiar?
Yes.
Okay, and so from responses to interrogatories and L&E's memorandum, to me, as someone who doesn't really get it, it sounded like maybe the matched population was underestimating morbidity and thus utilization. Is that even close?
Yes. So the results from the matched population, and we've used them for 22, 23, and 24, and 25, actually, for all of those filings. And what we are seeing now is, while the theory is sound, right, the application gets complicated, and I don't have that many resources to really kind of dig into all the application. And what we have seen and our results show is that it has been under predicting the utilization trends for this market.
Okay, and I think I heard you say just now, and this was one of my questions, the number of years you'd been using it. It was, what were the years again?
I believe it's 22 through 25.
22 through 25. Is it fair to say that maybe the matching got less precise over time? Did that happen?
That would be fair, yes.
Okay.
I think what's complicated with matching is that we can't rely on medical coding, right? We've talked about the coding intensity and changing in diagnostics. So we can't really rely on the medical coding to do the matching. So we have to rely on other things like the prescription drugs. But then as we match for 4 years, right, it is a little bit limited because of our size. Like, I'm pretty sure that even if we could include everybody in the state, it would still have some limitation from a population size for that sort of analysis.
Okay, so I guess to conclude this section, underestimating morbidity and utilization, to me, could that not explain some of Vermont, Blue Cross Vermont's recent losses? Could a little bit, at least?
Yes, we have missed on the utilization projections. on top of other things that happen, right? We've seen more services that are getting more expensive, but utilization trend is one of the areas where we did not expect to see a 5% utilization trend year over year, right? And I'm still honestly surprised that our actual results, that's what it was, or very close to. So that was really unexpected. And I don't know that even if we had used the full population at that time, I don't think we would have been in a place to project how high the utilization trend has been over the last year.
Okay, all right. I'm going to pivot to my final section, and hopefully this will be quick, but it's my favorite topic, prescription drugs. So, okay, all right. And I'm going to start just with H266, or Act 55 as it's now known. This was the legislation that was passed this last year that caps the reimbursement of outpatient administered drugs at most Vermont hospitals. It's 8 out of 12, I think, right? To 120% of the ASP. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And if I recall, and I was paying attention to this, Blue Cross was very much in favor of H266. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
Okay. What were some of the reasons why Blue Cross supported H266?
I think the main reason is that we saw how expensive we were compared to everywhere else, right? We saw the RAND report. We saw a few other studies that showed that Vermont was number one on most expensive, which is not a place where we want to be. And so and I think it's also a very concrete thing we can do. It's kind of a limited scope per se, right? There's so many medical codes, right? Like medical billing is, it seems like it's infinite, but having that specific place where we can have a specific benchmark with the ASP, and we have clear evidence that Vermont is an outlier, was I think one of the reasons why we really sort of focused on this piece right now.
Excellent. So you mentioned that specific benchmark, ASP, and now that is a specific benchmark, and it's collected by CMS for use in Medicare. Is that right? Or it's established by
I'm not
CMS
sure.
for use in Medicare? Okay, but it is a specific benchmark, yes?
It is a specific benchmark, yes.
Okay, in those pricing files, they're readily available to the public online, right? You can just look up ASP and you can find those pricing files. Are you aware? Did you know?
I did not know, but I'm assuming that they are available somehow. Whether it's easy or not, I don't know, but I know that they are available.
Okay, and you don't have to pay a subscription like you do for something like AWP, for example.
I don't know. I don't think so, but I'm not sure.
Okay. Would you agree that ASP is roughly equivalent to a hospital's actual acquisition cost for those drugs?
Well, ASP stands for average sales price, so I would think that that's what it is.
Okay, all right. And as such, capping reimbursement at 120% of ASP, there's some logic to that it would reimburse hospitals at their acquisition costs and then give them some margin, right, for storage, handling, administering, et cetera. Was that sort of the idea of setting it at 120?
I don't know why it was set at 120, and I don't know what the hospital's acquisition costs are.
Okay, all right, fair enough. I'm going to take you to Exhibit 17, page 6. These are the responses to HCA questions. And we asked you to provide 3 lists of 25 drugs, the 25 most frequently dispensed, 25 highest allowed charges, 25 highest year over year, and then to give us the AWP per unit and then the NADAC per unit for those drugs. So that's Exhibit 17, page 6. You recall these tables?
I do.
Okay. Of the 2 prices we asked for, AWP and NADAC, which of those in your mind is most similar to the ASP in that it's roughly equivalent to a drug's actual acquisition cost?
I don't know,
Okay.
but I would think, my understanding of NADAC is that it's related to Medicaid pricing, but I had never looked at it until you asked the question.
If I told you that NADAC stood for National Average Drug Acquisition Cost, would you believe me?
I believe you.
Okay, all right. Your PBM contract is not based on NADAC pricing, is it?
No,
And you do not
it's based on
develop
AWP.
AWP. You don't develop drug trend based on NADAC pricing?
We do not.
Okay, so your trend, your pharmacy reimbursement, your ingredient costs, all of that is based off of discounts off of AWP, right?
Yes, I believe there are some exceptions for some generics. There's other, I think it's usual and customary, right, UNC. So,
Okay.
But the majority of the claims are AWP.
Just looking at these tables and just do the top 25 most frequently dispensed and go down those two columns, AWP per unit and NADAC per unit, can you observe any relationship between the two?
No.
No.
It seems like there's no, if we were to do a graph, there would be no correlation.
No clear relationship, no correlation at all between the AWP and the NADAC. I'm curious, and this is a genuine curiosity, and maybe this is more than you can answer right now, but this has been something that's been on my mind since I've been doing this work. Wouldn't it create distortions when predicting trend to use AWP if it has no connection or an uncertain connection to what the drug actually costs, if you'll accept that NADAC is close to representing what a drug actually costs?
Well, so what we pay is based on AWP. And so for our purposes and what the ingredient cost ends up being for this line of business, AWP is the best metric because that is how the claims are defined.
Okay, I think I can understand that. I'm going to want to explore this further with you, maybe at some other time. I just have one little small section of questions, and then we'll be done.
Okay.
Again, looking at this list of the 25 most frequently dispensed drugs, Blue Cross's ingredient costs, which you're actually reimbursing pharmacies for. I know your trend is based off AWP and getting a discount off of AWP, but what you're ultimately paying is it's closer to that NADAC price. Is that fair? Do you know?
I don't know because brands and generic have different discounts. And so the AWP, sort of the ingredient cost, which is the AWP minus the discounts, would be different. And so the answer would be different for brand and generics.
Okay, and it's clear from this first table that these are all generics. It sounded like you were willing to accept the premise that NADAC is close to what drugs are acquired for. That's the cost of the drugs for the pharmacy. And if you'll humor me, I mean, I went ahead and divided the allowed charges by the number of scripts. And I can tell you that your ingredient costs are closer to, much closer to NADAC than they are to AWP. And just because I know everyone's ready to move on, I'm going to sort of ask my final question in a way where I'm like giving away the point I want to make, which is, imagine you're a Vermont pharmacist filling thousands of prescriptions for atorvastatin or omeprazole for, 4 cents per unit or 3 cents per unit, literally pennies. And do you know what your dispensing fee is to most pharmacies? Is it $1 per script?
No, it's very small. And I believe it's for some brands. Yeah.
Okay. So just imagine you're a pharmacist or you're a pharmacy trying to pay your bills. I mean, how does this model work? And it's unfair. Like I said, I'm asking a question where it's clear a point I'm trying to make, and I'm not going to ask you for a response. And I'm just going to wrap it up right there, if that's okay with everyone. And I'm sorry. I appreciate it for you humoring me with this exercise.
Thank you, Mr. Becker.
All right.
Moving on to board questions, starting with Board Member Holmes.
Great. Thank you so much. I know it's late in the day. I think we're all tired, so we're all gonna, I will do my best here. Long day. So it's good to see you again. Thank you for your testimony and for coming and all the work that I know that goes into putting these binders together and answering all of our questions. So I do have some, what I hope are actuarial questions for you. And you may even be able to anticipate this question because I asked the same question on Monday, but this isn't with regard to the individual market with the 6.6% premium increase that's related to the sunsetting of the the tax credits, estimating about 16% are going to exit. Yeah. So I looked over, the analysis there, and you've got a simulation model that's built on a lot of assumptions, about human behavior, speculation about the underlying health, and, there's a lot that goes into this. And I know you ran about 5,000 simulations that had varying retention rates. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time, given the late in the day, asking you all about those various retention rates and how they were assumed, but 6.6 is 1 point estimate, and I assume that there's a confidence interval. So, and I'm sure you're prepared for this, or I'm hoping you're prepared for this question. What is the confidence interval around that?
Right. So we don't do our estimates in a way that I can give you a confidence interval, right? That is not really how we go about our process. But there are more than one answers in some of these assumptions. And this particular one is absolutely one where, right, there's a lot of unknowns. We don't know how members are going to react, right? We don't know exactly how it's all going to come together. But when we set our assumption, right, one of the things we looked at is, we said, okay, our methodology is sound. We ran simulations, which gave us a range, right? And I don't remember what it was. And then we looked at what was happening outside of just us, right? Because it was like 3 of us trying to figure it out. And of course, we don't have all the knowledge. So we looked at what others were doing, right? There was a weekly study that was done for the state last year. They had an estimate. There was some estimates, public estimates by Oliver Wyman, right? And I participate in Blue Cross Association actuary forums where some consultants come and present, sort of national information. And so we had all that in mind when we picked a point estimate, because we have to pick a point estimate, right? I can't give you a range of rates. So I don't have sort of per se a confidence interval for this particular assumption. What I know is that it's in the range of other numbers that have been put out there for the same assumption. But this is part of the risk we're talking about today, right? There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of risk. This number could be 10%, right? And there could be a lot more members that leave. There could be a lot more disruption. So we have to sort of keep that in mind when we talk about sort of the overall risk that we're covering with our premiums.
Okay. Well, I think it's at one point you said you did 5,000 simulations and you came up with a range. So perhaps if you go back to that work, you can share what that range was. I recognize you may not have it right now, but it would be helpful to see somewhat more around what those estimates looked like. And you're right, there are a lot of estimates out there. I think Oliver Wyman came in at 5.9. I think KFF just published something that said it was about 4%. I think the Urban Institute came out with something last year that was 5. So the 6.6 is on the higher end of some of the things that I've seen out there. So it would be helpful to get a little more information about the assumptions specific to, your estimations. Oliver Wyman is a national study, and one of the things that, it represented was that young people are the most likely to leave, Blacks and Hispanics are the most likely to leave. So there's a lot of features about the national population that may not actually reflect our population here. We have an older population, we have a largely white population, we have a healthy population, right? So there's a lot of things that might not marry up against some of the national estimates. So it'd be helpful to understand that a little bit more. I wondered how else you're factoring in some of the other features of this big, not so beautiful act. In particular, my understanding is that there's an end to the income-based special enrollment periods, and those allow lower income people to enroll at any point during the year, which I imagine would be a triggering event, would be their health, something in their health that, forces them to enroll. So how does that impact the morbidity assumptions that you might make if low income people can no longer enroll at any point during the year?
So we did not make a specific assumption around changes in morbidity for all the changes in the in the enrollment process that was going to happen. There was uncertainty around the effective dates, right, at the time that we were all doing this work, or that even some of the provisions would go through. So we don't have specific assumptions around impacts of those changes or impacts that that bill did to Medicaid, right, and how that could all flow through. We don't have any of that in these rates, which really, again, to my point, there's a lot of uncertainty around how this whole market is going to be and is, what's going to happen to it, right? And so we have to be really mindful about all of the projections.
Okay. With respect to 266 or Act 55, does your analysis make any assumptions about patients moving towards a lower cost facility with respect to these, basically now that they can, move to a facility that has 120% cap versus where they're currently receiving their infusions, say, for example?
No, we didn't include in our estimates sort of membership shifts from where they are currently getting their care, right? So to calculate our estimates, we looked at our experience period and capped that, right? And then added all the projections. So there's no assumptions around members choosing a different facility or facilities choosing a different site of care or any of that, sort of those things that can happen.
Okay, so in some sense, there could be an underestimate of the impact of Act 55 if some patients that are facing high cost sharing can switch now to hospitals that have, these drug caps, or Blue Cross Blue Shield could potentially steer patients that attend right now, get their infusions at Dartmouth Hitchcock, which is not going to be impacted by the drug cap, to say a Mount Scottney or a Brattleboro that would be impacted by the drug cap. So there is opportunity potentially for some patients receiving the care at some of these higher priced hospitals to move and benefit from these drug caps.
Right, and there's also opportunities for new members to decide to go to Dartmouth because that's the best thing for their care as well, right? I think the opportunities around the caps are go both ways.
Okay. Another question around reinsurance. So I noticed that there was one individual member who has very high drug costs that are not covered by reinsurance. I believe it was about $1.85 million in claims for this one individual that had to get factored in its entirety without benefit of reinsurance. And I wondered if that individual would be potentially impacted by this drug cap and whether that might actually lower that addition in the rate.
Unfortunately, no, because this particular member on this particular drug is through the pharmacy benefit. And it is a very unique, I would say, right? It's what they call like orphan drugs, right? And so this particular member is not impacted by this cap, but we do have the high cost risk pool, right? So while they are excluded from corporate reinsurance, they are eligible for the federal high cost risk pool and that is reflected in the rates.
Great. And then I guess I was also thinking about reinsurance in general. A lot of it seems as though some of the potential need for reinsurance might be mitigated by this drug cap. Is that possible? That this drug cap could be really reducing some of the claims costs for some of these high cost claimants who were, you know, utilizing these very expensive drugs on a regular basis. Would it have any impact on the premium for reinsurance with this drug cap?
Possibly, but that would be up to our reinsurer, right? There's a lot of other claims that are really, really high. So I don't know exactly the proportion of the claimants that go above $1 million that are because there are some on these drugs, right? There's other reasons why you can go above reinsurance.
Yeah, it'd be really helpful if you could look into that, just because to the degree that it actually reduces the premium for reinsurance or the need for reinsurance, it might impact these rates, right? This drug, I'm thinking these drug caps could flow through to other areas besides just the expense there, the pharmacy expense. I'm trying to see if there's other questions here I have. Yeah. There is, so Act 111, I know, and I talked a little bit about it this morning, but you know, it does, it is, you've adjusted the QHP rates upward to account for these higher costs of claims stemming from the restrictions on, you know, utilization management, largely prior auths. But we also know that prior authorizations can delay care. They can require, you know, intermediate steps that are costly but ineffective, and they can encourage more ED visits if people can bypass prior auths by going to the ED. So I'm wondering if any of your calculations make any adjustments for the reductions in delayed care, you know, the reductions in the total cost of care that could materialize as a result of the elimination of some prior auths.
So I don't have data around what would have happened if a member had had that prior authorization in what they consider a timely manner. So that is not something we can really estimate, right? And so it's not something that's included in the rates.
Okay, so do you know how many people, for example, go to the ED to avoid prior auths?
I don't. That's not part of the information we have.
Okay. And then I guess my last question is around, and we brought this up a little bit earlier today, but trying to really understand when you submitted the rates, there wasn't really an understanding what the other carrier is going to submit. But now we know there's a sizable difference between the two carriers. So how would you update the model to account for the relatively high request that Blue Cross Blue Shield has relative to MVP? How would it change, for example, the projected QHP membership, and how does that flow through the model, seeing that differential and understanding people's price elasticities there and switching?
Right, so we don't have that information when we do the projected claims, and we never have it right on time. And really what's difficult is that, as we've learned this year, right, the rates that are filed are very different from the rates that end up being approved. This year being, you know, Act 55 was this thing we did not know, and now we're putting in. And so we have not, we usually wait to see what final rates are to do our projected membership forecast, because so much can happen between May and August.
Okay.
But we'll do that work for the financial forecast, and usually in the fall, once we understand and once we can work with the sales department to understand how they think that these rate relationships will impact membership.
If there is a large exodus from Blue Cross Blue Shield towards MVP, and there's a loss of membership, how does that impact the need for member reserves?
It doesn't. Member reserve is a percent of the total projected. And so it would be 7% of a smaller amount, but it would still be 7%.
If your membership shrinks, there's less pressure on the full surplus, right?
The RBC formula will be adjusted because volume, yes, but there's still a lot of risk and uncertainty.
Okay. Okay, those are all my questions. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Chair Foster.
Yeah, hi, Ms. Bristol, nice to see you. You have some data available at Blue Cross Blue Shield for fiscal year 25, is that correct?
Yes.
And how would you characterize what you're seeing year to date in hospital claims in 2025 vis-a-vis what you experienced in 2024?
We are not experiencing a surge like we did last year, right? So for our insured lines of business, which is what I have in my brain to remember right now, the 2025 incurred claims are as we expected in our forecast, right? And the forecast is what we have talked earlier. That is not what we had thought when the rates were approved, right? So we are targeting to have our claims be at the level that we expect will generate approximately 4% contribution to reserve, assuming the second half of the year continues to behave the way it has so far.
Okay, I'm going to go to Exhibit 15, page 21. It has a table by hospital with variance to target for 24 and fiscal year 25.
Yes.
In preparing your rate request, did you consider the fiscal year 25 performance at all?
No, right? So when we do the rates, we take 2024 experience and project it through 2026. And the cost increases for Vermont Hospital, well, for all hospitals, right, were the ones that were agreed upon for 2025. But we didn't have year-to-date information to see how those were under over and to reflect that.
Okay. But you didn't look at what's happening in 2025 to pressure test your assumptions when you projected from 2024 to 2026. Is that fair?
Right. We had 2 months of data of completed data when we filed. It's not reliable.
You now have more months of data and you have more reliability in that data. And are you planning to make any adjustment or to consider the fiscal year 25 performance in projecting your claims for 26?
At this point, from what I'm seeing so far, there's nothing that warrants a change in my projection.
And why is that?
Because 25 is tracking with where we were thinking it was going to track. And so the increase that we need, right, is really, it's like a year of trend and a few other things, but I don't have a reason so far to think that the sort of implicit 2025 in the 26 projection, right, because it's a 2-year thing, is not very different from what we're seeing year to date emerging with our results.
Are you aware of the Care Board's settlement with the University of Vermont Medical Center?
I am.
And is there any component of that settlement that would impact fiscal year 26 rates?
Yes, so we did reflect part of that settlement in the projected cost trend, right? And so my understanding in the settlement was that the remainder of the FY23 enforcement, which was $40 million, right, was going to be split between fiscal year 26 and 27. And so when we did our projected cost trend for 26 for UVM, we reflected the expectation, right, that a baseline of 3% for the guidance would be reduced by that $20 million, give or take, for the enforcement. And I know we put a table in the binder. I cannot remember which exhibit it's in.
Settlement agreement also requires UVM to appear before the board for a mid-year adjustment. Is that reflected in your rate requests?
It is not, because that is a 2025 event.
You know what the settlement required UVM to do with regard to a fiscal year 25 overage?
My understanding is that they were supposed to come to you with a mid-year rate reduction.
So, and why is that not reflected in 26 rates? It would reduce the price per the settlement agreement. Why is that not in the rate for 26?
Well, at the time of filing, and really up until Monday, we had not seen anything around what they were proposing to the board, right? So at the time of filing, it said, if we are over, we will come with a mid-year, which is great, and we're really happy that it's happening. But at the time of filing, we had no information to know that they would actually be over.
Got it. And do you know by how much they're over for fiscal year 25?
Not exactly, but I understand that they filed a document with you that explained that they were over and that they were intending to change some reimbursements.
And then there are fiscal year 24 enforcement actions that are potentially before the board as well, relating to CVMC and Springfield. Do your 26 rates reflect the potential for enforcement for those hospitals that were over in 24?
They do not, because we did not have that information at the time of filing. It's my understanding that those will be addressed through the hospital budgets process. And we agreed that we should update for hospital budgets. And so I expect that will all kind of flow through that way.
Then do your rates for 26, your request, do they reflect the hospital budgets that were submitted to the board?
They do not.
So on exhibit 15, page 21, do you have more current data for UVM? At the time of the submission, you only had 3 months experience for fiscal year 25. Do you have more current data now?
So we need at least 3 months of run out, right, to do this analysis. So we sit here in July. So we have June data, right, completed June data right now, which means that we can only use anchored through March for it to be complete and usable for this information, for this analysis.
Sorry, so why do you have 6 months for everybody but the UVMHN hospitals?
Their contract with us is on a calendar year basis. All other hospitals have a October 1st start date.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Has that always been the case?
It has changed in the last 15 years I was here, but I cannot tell you when.
Okay.
But it's been more than a few years.
Okay, thanks. Are you familiar with the term monthly relativities?
In what context?
In the context of medical claims?
I'm not sure I understand the context, sorry.
In terms of the context is evaluating how the medical claims appear relative to, I think it's relative to forecast.
Oh, yes, so actual to expected on a monthly basis, yes.
Yeah, and have you looked at those for fiscal year 25?
We have.
And could you provide that data to the board?
Yes, yes, we can.
And was there any consideration, or sorry, was there any impact on the fiscal year 26 rate request from what you saw in the monthly relativities data?
Not from 2025, Because again, at the time of filing, we did not have 2025 data. And so far this year, I don't, it's not tracking to a place where it would make me change my answer for 26.
Responsive Member Holmes, you discussed the analysis that was done on morbidity. And my understanding is that it's Blue Cross's position that morbidity will increase due to the additional cost that members will have to bear if the APTC credits go away. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Did you perform any assessment on morbidity that would be associated with a 23.3% rate increase?
Not beyond the factor that we put in for the expectation of members leaving for the changes in APTC.
Okay. Why did you not do an assessment for the impact on morbidity for members leaving due to a rate increase?
So when we set the rates, we have to do a claims projection, right? Which is the vast majority of what I do and the rates, right? And I don't know what MVP is going to file, right? And I can't do sort of what if scenarios that get me into the circular reference, right? If the increase is lower than this, if the increase is higher than that, what we can do is at the time of the filing, our projected claims costs for the members that are with us, right? Sort of putting aside one-time items like the expiration of subsidies. That is the work we do.
Okay. Is there something different about the expiration of subsidies and the dollar implication for members in that that's different than the financial implications of the 23% rate request?
So that was a one-time item that's coming from an external force, right? And so it is impacting the whole market, right? The information I don't have is what the competitor is going to do.
I see. It seems like it's two things, right? People could move to the competitor, people could drop, or people could buy down, right? There's a couple different options, not just the competitor. I guess what I'm getting at is, do you agree that you may have increased morbidity due to a 23% rate increase?
Yes, there are some possibilities where members will choose for another options, whatever that is, because of the increase. But I just want to be clear that we are no longer asking for a 23% increase, right? We will incorporate the changes for Act 55. And that alone, right, brings the rates down by about 4%. And we will incorporate the updated information around risk adjustment, which also brings the rates down.
The numbers move, and there's a lot of numbers. What's the current request?
So we talked about this internally. There's no current request because of the uncertainty around how to incorporate the hospital budget, right? In prior years, we did sort of a request at hearing because the hospital budgets and the interconnection with Act 55 were not sort of creating this situation where we're really not sure kind of how they go together. But if we use Eleni's report as our basis, right, even though we have some small disagreements, I think that is sort of where we can have our minds on the increases. And for individual, it's for the Eleni report, it's 15.5.
How certain is Blue Cross that the enhanced subsidies will not be renewed?
As certain as anyone can be on this call around what the federal government can do. So I don't know, right? My understanding is that there is still a possibility that it will happen. But so I don't know, which is why we submitted 2 sets of rates.
Is there a chance that the subsidies, if they were to be not renewed, that they're phased out more slowly and over time?
I guess that's an option.
All right, I'm gonna move to drug price cap bill. You had mentioned a 4% rate decrease approximately due to the drug price cap bill. Is that right?
Yeah, combined for individual and small group.
What do you mean combined for each?
So the individual market will have a slightly larger impact and the small group will have a slightly smaller impact. So if I put the two together, it's about 4%. But it's really like 4.1 for the individual market and I think 3.3 for the small group market.
Going to exhibit 15, page 17.
Yes.
Question 9, quantify the impact. Do you see that?
Yes.
Then the second paragraph reads, quote, using the methodology described in response to question 8, we estimate that a cap of 120% would lower the average rate increase from 13.5% to 9.7% for small group and 23.5% to 18.4% for individual.
Yes.
Can you explain? So that to me, 23.5 to 18.4 is 5.1%.
Yes, when I compare increases, I divide them. I don't do subtraction, but those are the same numbers I was using.
You're gonna have to walk me through the math. I mean, it says the request was
Yeah, absolutely.
23.5,
So
and
really,
say now the request would be 18.4.
so the math we do when we do changes and increases, really, it would be 1 plus 18.4% divided by 1 plus 23.5%.
Okay. Get that.
But in total, it's all the same, we're all talking about the same thing, right? We're talking about the $20 million that this would save this combined market.
Maybe it's a language issue here with the answer, because the answer says the average rate increase would go down to 18.4 from 23.5.
That's correct.
So your testimony is the impact of the drug price cap bill would not be down to 18.4, it'd be down to 19.4.
Oh, I misspoke. It is 18.4, sorry.
Okay. All right. Your methodology only included the top 50 most expensive drugs. Is that correct? Sorry. What drugs did your methodology include?
All drugs that have an ASP.
All
that
drugs,
are dispensed in outpatient or professional setting. Sorry.
All drugs, not just the top 50.
Correct.
Seem to have a memory that in the legislative session, Blue Cross had submitted a letter and said it would be about 4.1% decrease in commercial prices for the top 50.
At the time of that letter, it was those estimates were done at a much higher level, right? And not necessarily as specific as these estimates that we do for pricing purposes.
Right. New biosimilars and generics come on the market every year, is that correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
And ASPs can go down with the entry of a biosimilar to the market?
I suspect it does, but I don't know for sure.
Okay. Did you do any analysis in coming up with this calculation of the impact of new drugs entering the market?
No, we used the ASP that was available at the time we did the calculation.
Did you look back to see in prior years how many ASPs decreased throughout the course of a year?
No,
So if a drug had an ASP, so in the legislation, it requires hospitals to check and adjust ASP twice a year, correct?
I think so, yes.
And so ASPs can move throughout the year, and I presume that they have moved throughout the years historically. So if an ASP goes down and you're paying 120%, you're now paying a lower amount, correct?
In that one specific case, yes.
So in some sense, the estimate here is incomplete.
It's the best we can do with the information we had and the time we had at the time.
You said you reviewed, or maybe it's you tested that the Blue Cross request complies with all relevant Vermont laws. Is that right?
Yes,
And did you review 8 VSA 4062?
yes, although I don't know all the numbers by heart, but I did review, I am familiar with the Vermont laws.
Okay. So 8 VSA 4062 and 18 VSA 9375 are the standards by which the board needs to conduct its job here in this space. 4062 is determining whether a rate's affordable, promotes quality, et cetera, et cetera. 9375 requires the board to execute its duties, including in connection with rate review, consistent with the principles of healthcare reform expressed in 18 VSA 9371. Did you review 18 VSA 9371?
I am familiar with those laws, yes.
And did you review 9371 to determine whether or not this rate request is consistent with it?
The rates comply with all Vermont laws, yes.
It looks like Ms. Green provided some testimony kind of generally about the healthcare market in Vermont and the affordability issues. And I think she had said the silver plan on Blue Cross for family of 4 would be north of $55,000 if these rates at 23% were approved. I think last year we had a 15 to 20% rate increase. The year before, double digits. This year, potentially being requested 15 to 23, something like that. Do you think this is a sustainable way to finance our healthcare system?
I think there's probably better ways to finance the overall healthcare system.
So I just want you to specifically answer my question. My question is, do you think these rates and the rates that we've approved in recent years is a sustainable way to finance the healthcare system?
I don't know that I can answer that question.
Why or why not?
That seems beyond my area of expertise.
That's one of the legal requirements, and you testified that you certified that these rates comply with all Vermont law.
Right, and I rely on other experts to help me say that these rates comply with all Vermont laws.
Okay, so your attestation is based on what other people told you?
Yes, I relied on other experts to help me ensure that the rates we file follow all the laws.
And who did you rely on to determine that this is a sustainable way to finance the healthcare system?
Well, we have attachment D, which is exhibit 4, right? We have a letter from our chief medical officer and our chief financial officer addressing the non-actuarial standards in rate review.
I don't recall that addressing the sustainability of the financing of the healthcare system. So
I'm not sure I'm following the question.
Yeah, I'm not trying to like put you on the spot, but it's a fair question. It's part of our rate review standard that these rates need to comply with all Vermont law, and the law specifically references 9371, which is the principles of healthcare reform, which includes a requirement that it's a sustainable financing of the healthcare system. And you testified and asserted that these rates do, and then you testified that you relied on other people. But it doesn't seem like you know who that would be as to this component of the rates, the sustainability requirement. And that's okay. I just want to know the answer.
I don't remember specifically reading about sustainability of the financing of the healthcare in Vermont.
Right. Another component of 9371 talks about the requirement that costs be contained and unnecessary expenditures. I don't have the exact language in front of me, but that there's mechanisms to remove unnecessary expenditures. Do you have any information as to how these rates comply with that requirement?
I'm sorry, can you please repeat the question?
Yeah, let me see if I can get you the exact language. It might help. So it's 937110. Vermont's healthcare system must include mechanisms for containing all system costs and eliminating unnecessary expenditures, including by reducing administrative costs and by reducing costs that do not contribute to efficient, high-quality health services or improve health outcomes. Efforts to reduce overall healthcare costs should identify sources of excess growth. So my question
so cost
is,
containment.
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Please finish your question, sorry.
Yeah, my question is, what did you do to confirm that these rates comply with that requirement?
So that's a lot of cost containment, right? And we do a lot of that. We do payment integrity. We have a thorough process around prior authorizations, right? Where they are reviewed to make sure that the effort spent on them is worth the, outcomes. We have value-based payments that work with the providers to enhance quality. So we do a lot of those programs, and we revisit a lot of the things we do on an ongoing basis to make sure that we're spending our efforts in the right places.
Does Blue Cross at all look at or ask hospitals about their expenditures and whether or not they have unnecessary expenditures in their budgets that these rates contribute to paying for?
I don't think so. That is part of the hospital budget, is my understanding.
My view is it's also part of the rates, and that there needs to be an effort to make sure that the rates aren't going to support unnecessary expenditures pursuant to these laws. But I appreciate your testimony today very, very much, and thank you for being here. I have nothing else.
Thank you.
Board Member Walsh, do you have questions?
No, I think Chair Foster's the questions he just finished cover everything that I hope to know more about at this time.
Board Member Merman?
I don't have any more questions. Thank you, though.
Mr. D'Onofrio, do you have any redirect, or do you need a minute to figure that out?
Yeah, I'd love 2 minutes. I can just mute the line here and go off camera, or we can take a 5-minute break, whatever you like. I'd just like to, my notes are all over the table.
Yeah, why don't we target 4:50 to start again?
That's fine. Thank you.